An African asks you, why are you so pro-African? Why are you so pro-Rwanda? Me, as the brand owner, I had to disappear in order for my work to become visible.
30 years ago, a young Rwandan refugee studied accounting because that was the safe African dream. But the numbers couldn't silence the louder calling, creativity. Today, Nyambo Masa Mara joins us in Kigali, Rwanda. He is turning personal history into a global fashion language.
Sometimes when I tell them I'm Masa Mara, they still get surprises. People who are outside of the creative industry, they know of the work, but they don't know the people behind it.
His bold prints have walked stages from Portugal Fashion to Shanghai Fashion Week. Yet his real mission goes deeper, proving African fashion is not a trend, it's a movement. He says he's not just a messenger, he is the message.
There's no blueprint when we started. There was no people who looked like us in the industry. Of course, we had to take, all the rejection and we turn them into, a building block.
A message about pride, identity, and building a legacy that will still make Africans smile in the mirror 100 years from now.
If your designs could say one thing to Africa and Rwanda, for that matter, what would they say? Hello and welcome to Rooted in Quality, the podcast where we delve deep into conversations with people who are making and building on this continent that we also love. It's Rooted in Quality. My name is Sendo Tamaklo, and today we are joined by the amazing Masa Mara. Or should I call you Nyambo?
Nyambo, yes, Nyambo Masa Mara, yeah.
Thank you very much for joining us on this conversation, Rooted in Quality by Afro Quality.
Rooted in Quality. Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure for me to be here, to be talking to you today. I'm looking forward to this beautiful conversation.
I've looked forward to it for a while now. Now tell me, Nyambo, when you stand on a stage after a runway show with models wearing your pieces and showcasing everything with a blend of migration, ritual representations, and sports, what parts of that moment feels most true when it comes to the person that you know yourself to be?
Oof, this is a beautiful, beautiful question to start with. So, to me, a stage is my ancestors' shoulders. When I'm standing on that stage, I'm literally, showing that we are their wildest dreams. So it's a place where I connect with them. It's a place where I show them that what they've started, is going to be carried forward by us. It's me assuring them. You will notice when I'm on stage, every time, I kneel down, I greet the ground, I appreciate them, I thank them, for what they've done. It's a very special place for me where I'm connecting with them through this world and this realm today.
Wow, that's interesting. Where did you get that drive to always seek to connect with your ancestry?
It's a long journey. It's really a long journey of self-discovering. It's a long journey of me finding myself in many countries on the African continent. I think it was not by coincidence. It was a passage of, a rite of passage.
Okay.
It was a ritual, me training to become this person I am today. So I definitely think this was the purpose in which I was, born to do. Sometimes when one says it sounds vague, but I do believe that now when I trace back what I do, I get to understand it was,
By design.
By design, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah.
You left Rwanda as a child during a time of unimaginable pain and trauma. Do you remember the first time you felt displaced?
I was very young, but it's one of those things that even, as infant, you can still almost feel it, throughout. It shapes the way in which you think and the way in which you look forward. So in that moment when we first left, somehow, it was one of the toughest price, that human can pay. It was one of the tragedies that we had to endure as a human, and mostly Rwandans. But for me, that journey, I live each day trying to make sure that it's a lesson that we can never forget. It's a lesson that we need to teach the world. Unfortunately, we were the ones to pay the price, to be the mirror of the humanity, and to make sure that we live each day, by not going back.
Do you feel like your entire life is always a message that you're trying to communicate?
It's an interesting question, actually, that you said. I call myself as a living message.
Okay.
I am a living message because I always believe that as a messenger, the message get lost. So when you become a message, you can never be forgotten, you can never be ignored. So I'm very fortunate and grateful that I'm able to be the message, and be able to connect, with the Africa and the world before, being a part of the world and being part of the, being one of those Africans who are trying to reshape the African image, the African identity, and introducing ourselves to ourselves and to the world beyond. Yeah.
You know what you just said, and thinking about it from a business point of view, there's always that story about when you are building a business, like living your brand. But basically, it's the same principle as living the message or being the message. So you are the full embodiment of that which you represent. I'm sure if somebody sees you, by default, when they figure out what you do, they would not be surprised because they can actually see it's being fully represented in the person that you are. Growing up, you grew up across multiple African countries. Where did you feel most at home?
I'm still trying to find the home. Trying to
Okay.
find a home. The concept of home, of course, I do understand the roots and the place which that birthed me, where I began, where my story began. But I came to realize that we are bigger than, our roots might not be deep, but they are wild and strong. I've always lived in liminal, I'm everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Of course, it's my mission to make sure that I show the world that we're not lost. We know who we are, because third culture kids often are referred as, a lost generation because we belong to multi, places, But at the end of the day, we are here to show that Africa is one. Africa was always one, and we are retracing back the roots, the map.
As you spoke and talked about third culture kids and how it impacts on identity, a thought just crossed my mind that
Yeah.
that could actually be the window to create the representation of what Africa was before the colonial borders. So that
Exactly.
when you have more people who have multiple experiences across what you would call the colonial
Yeah.
division, then we can now see how well, like what we actually are, which is the same people.
Because that's so true. Because that's why I said we belong everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Because we're living in the places that was designed by others. We didn't design these borders in which we find refuge in. So then, when you grow up in different places, you actually a reminder of what Africa used to be. So we are put here for purpose, to make sure that we can always show that we are ones, even if it's because of we existing in a places that doesn't recognize us, but it doesn't mean we don't have the purpose in being in those places. Right now we belong nowhere and everywhere at the same time. Yeah.
Belong nowhere and everywhere at the same time. Wow. I realized some minutes ago, just before we started recording, that you can actually speak Kinyarwanda, and I was surprised. And like, for my next question, like, what role did your family play in holding your identity together throughout this journey, because you've not lived in Rwanda for over 20 years.
Yeah.
And it's just amazing how still
Yeah.
rooted you are.
I was really, really very fortunate. I didn't know that until I started becoming the person I am becoming today. Honestly, now that's when I'm realizing, actually, that's when I say, sometimes I say I'm a living ancestor as well, simply because things like that, you know, me not losing my identity, me not losing my Rwandanness. It's really, I didn't have a place to look at, you know, or my family didn't have much impact in it. It was me, you know, remembering what my people were, you know. So my grandfather literally like had the same ambitious. It was all about Africanism. In sometime like the first actually genocide that took place in Rwanda, he refused to free the country. He changed his identity because he wanted his children to be born in Rwanda. So now that I start speaking of Africanism, you know, the Rwandanism, you know, and then my parents, my family are like, oh, actually, this is how it was. As someone who grew up away from my family and everyone, so now they get to see me, they get to see my grandfather in me, you know, and it's such a surprising, you know, because I never met him, don't know what he looked like, but I resemble him. So it literally was, you know, it's that DNA, you know,
It's deep.
yeah, it's definitely, you know, so yeah.
You are your grandfather's
Yeah,
reincarnation.
literally, yeah.
Wow. Maybe before we move to the next part, when you think about how you design, does it partly come from a place of trying to rebuild that which, I wouldn't say you lost, that which you've been detached from physically?
I would say yes. I would really say yes, but it's more than that. You know, it's more of that. We literally, actually, what you said, we lost it. We lost ourselves. You know, when the invaders came to Africa, we lost of who we are. We lost our identity, our way of lives. So my work and my mission is to create a future forward, you know, thinking for African. For us, you know, I'm so fortunate enough that it comes through garments, textile, you know, creativity is my platform, is my way of communications. So definitely I would say it's me actually not rebuilding, it's remembering. You know, I think for me it makes sense because most of the things that I do, to be honest, it surprises me how things that I talk about, things that I do, I'm self-taught, everything from textile designing, garment construction, you know, sculpturing, all these things, you know, it found me. And many more, you know, I keep discovering myself. And the only way I can justify that is me remembering, because it already existed.
No, I'm talking about being self-taught. Um, you trained as an accountant.
Yeah.
When I think about it, it surprises me in a lot of ways because I have a finance background, and finance and accounting people are thought of to be like straight-jacketed people
Yeah.
with very little room for creativity and stuff
Yeah.
like that. How did you end up from accounting?
It's, it was not my choice. As many African people or children, we found ourselves in places of safety, you know, trying to do things that can secure us, you know. We've been told this is the only way. But I was fortunate enough that there was something at the back of my mind, you know, that was always there, and it brewed throughout, you know, my education. You know, I never lost a touch of creativity, even when I didn't know it was creativity. You know, I've always been a creative. I've always been, you know, curious, you know, in making things. But when I finished my studies, worked for a few years, and the calling was too loud for me not to answer.
So when we look at your collections and your products, and I think whilst we would put some reels of some of your products in this talk so that people can identify or connect with some of your products. they're always full of movements, and your stage appearances almost feel like a ritual. Like, which cultural memory, like, is it a song, is it a dance, or is it like a family tradition that sits at the root of that level of expression when you put together your shows?
Oof, yeah, it's quite a lot, honestly speaking. Being a multidisciplinary artist, you touch so many mediums, and one of them, it's really me trying to like, it always comes in a way of telling that story. How do we broaden this canvas? How do we reach many people? Of course, it's a very sacred moment when I'm putting a collection together. Africa is known, communicating through drums, through sounds, through element and symbols, and you can't not talk of sacred, place or moment or rituals without having all these elements. It's a part of the communication. We've always communicated through such ways. So it makes sense for me when I'm presenting my work, to bring it to that beginning, and of course shape it in a way that it speaks to the global and the world beyond.
Then, do you see yourself more as a fashion designer or as a performance artist?
I see myself more as a storyteller, to
Okay.
be honest. It's a storyteller and who's gifted many gifts, fashion being one of it. And of course, one of the, best way to do a fashion, presentation is a performance, and then of course, as an artist, that performance comes in. So it's very broad, it's very deep. It's a storytelling, honestly.
So, for somebody who doesn't know you but then sees your work and realizes all this interplay between the performance, the storytelling, and everything, if I'm to decouple everything and say, if I look at you in your fashion space,
Yeah.
which influences do you get outside of, like, are there any artists outside of these spaces that still influences you or you look up to?
Um, yeah, I'm very much inspired and influenced by the universe,
Okay.
because I always believe that universe is the perfect art. It's a perfect, the creator is a perfect artist, in everything. That, if you get to see um, how everything is built, for me, that's more of my inspirations, the nature, the way everything coexists, the harmony between everything that we see around. And that's why I use quite a lot of colors, you doing things that normally wouldn't go together, but because of that hand that's written everything, it always coexists, and you find that harmony between everything. So I can say my inspiration, of course, I admire many artists, in the world, who've pushed, these creativities and storytelling. There's quite a lot. None living, who've lived before. My grandfather, of course, is one of my inspiration. Who we work, my grandfather and my mother, they're both my partners from the other side of the world, and their representation in this world. So those are my inspirations, I would say.
Outside of your close family, are there any external known
Artists.
creatives or artists that also have inspired your
Yeah,
work?
yeah. I mean, there's quite a lot. There's really quite a lot. I know exactly what's happening in the African scenery of creativity. There's a lot of people that we grew up together. There's people like Imprints, doing amazing things in the world. We've really seen each other grow and become the biggest people we can become. There's many more, like Matlosas, and there's Rich Munisis, more. And when you go beyond the world, I mean, within the global, there's like people like Rick Owens, who've always like made sure they don't conform into the world's norm.
The box,
They're trying to become who they were meant to become. People like that, really inspires, and they show it's possible. Yeah.
So when I look at a lot of your works as well, the longhorn motif, is it the Nyambo?
Yes.
It appears a lot in your work,
Yeah.
and What does this symbolize to you personally? Because I can even see sometimes your hairstyle even can be shaped into it, and then your name is Nyambo, which is like Nyambo Nyambo. What's really is it? What defines everything that you represent?
I mean, it's really me connecting to my roots, Rwanda, where everything was begun. You know, personally, it really the longhorns, you know, means or symbolizes to me. It's a reminder rather than a symbol. It's a reminder that our thought is our inheritance. You know, the power of our mind. You know, that's why I've carried it on my head as a constant reminder, the weight of it. You know, it reminds me that we are here for a purpose. We are here to fulfill and to always, you know, show who we are, you know, to not conform or become the image that was painted for us. Of course, it comes with so much with it, embodying your identity, but I think it's our greatest pride.
So I'll touch a little bit around your story with Rwanda. And for me, the first time I got to know about your works, and having been in and out of Rwanda for a while since 2014, I was first surprised that at your level, like you're playing at that level in the fashion industry, and very little was known about you and even your connection to Rwanda. Like, do you think Rwanda as a country recognizes itself in your work?
Not only Rwanda, but Africa as a whole.
Okay.
It really found it hard for them to see themselves, you know, within my work. But I'm not surprised, and I'm aware of it, and that's why I'm here, you know. So I would say, because we've been taught to not like ourselves. We've been taught not to look to appreciate what we see in the mirror. And Masa Mara is a reflection of what Africa should be looking like, of what Rwanda should look like. And then when you've been programmed to reject yourself, and when you look yourself in the mirror, you cannot, you know. But I know is why I'm here. I know is why we're creating. I've seen changes through time, because it was not like this 10 years ago. 10 years ago, it was a pure rejection. But now you see a progress, people understanding, slowly wanting to know, you know, what makes you African? What makes you Rwanda? It's a sad question. You know, when an African asks you, why are you so pro-African? Why are you so pro-Rwanda? You know, it's saddest things, but when you are put in such position, you see it before they see it.
You know, it's interesting the question that you're asking about when somebody asks, why are you so African? Why are you so pro-African? Why are you so pro? Why should that even be a question? Exactly. Why should you not be pro-African if you're an African? That's where it becomes...
Yeah, no, that's exactly one of the toughest things, and that's why we've very much made it our very mission to become the identification of what African should look like. You know, it's one of the things that we haven't compromised on in the past 10 years. You know, our message has been very clear, very strong. It's only got better. You know, of course, it comes with so much challenges, but because we know why, we are here to become that mirror. Hopefully, people will get comfortable of looking themselves in that mirror.
Yeah. You know, when I look at how well you are accepted in the world out there, like on the global stages, and people get excited about having you, is there a risk for you in trying to gain or rebuild that level of visibility in the international stage back in Africa? Is there a temptation or a risk to really dilute yourself so as to gain acceptance within Africa?
Not at all. Not at all. I don't think, because of course it's just a pity. I had to do things that I really hated the most. I had to go outside in order to be able to be accepted back home. You know, because we always want approval. We always want to, you know, for the world outside to say, oh, you worth to be looked at. You know, it's one of the prize I was willing to do. But I've never really seen anything of me trying to dilute myself. If there's anything, it's I want to strengthen myself of course, mentally, physically, spiritually, because when you're constantly being questioned, amongst your kin, it's hardest thing. It's really one of the hardest things. But as far as diluting myself, I don't think it's something that we think of doing, but we want to make sure that we become part of the global conversations within the fashion industry. As an African, participating in these global conversations because we are part of the world. We're not just African. We are citizens of the world. We are part of the world. So with that African identity, we can also contribute so much equally, even more, to the world's fashion conversations.
If your designs could say one thing to Africa and Rwanda,
Yeah.
for that matter, what would they say? And I'm picking this based off
Yeah.
the earlier conversation around how we as Africans see ourselves and sometimes see ourselves from the colonial eyes that have been created for us.
Yeah, I would say if my designs, and I do hope, and I hope they say that, that I'm here to remind us of who we are. So I hope my creation are a reminder of who we are as African. It's definitely a decolonization, message. I think, I hope it's sending, and also reintroducing us to ourselves. I think it's more of that because we've been lost. Our identity has been diluted and contaminated, and I think until we have brands like Masa Mara, to say, and many other actually, to say, this is us. This is who we are. Let's learn to love ourselves.
So, as you spoke, two thoughts came to mind. Going international and having all the international acclaim and acceptance, and building credibility back home.
Yes.
I've had conversations with other creatives who have also believed that putting African creativity out there should not be put in the box.
Yeah.
In terms of, okay, when it comes to the international stage, anything that has tribal marks and tribal representation and is colorful, that is what is seen as authentically African.
Yeah.
But then we also need to create an avant-garde version where we have the recognition of the roots, but still make it modern, make it everyday.
Yes.
First, what is your take on that perspective?
Honestly, I think it's us. It's up to us, because the more we tell our story, the more we own our image, our identity, the more we don't confine and compromise on us, the world will accept us. But they can never accept us until we accept ourselves. I think that's where we need to start from. Do we understand Africa is vast? The both under the soil, above the soil, the richness that we hold, the culture, the diversity. So we can't classify Africa, as just one thing. We are many, we are vast. So it's just us understanding that and understanding the power within our diversity, and then finding a way to bring ourselves together through this creativity, because that's the most language we speak as creative. So if we can then strengthen ourselves in that, the world have no choice but to accept.
And that representation doesn't have to come in only one form. It could be a fusion of where we want to get to, but having that connection to our roots.
Yeah.
My follow-up to that is on when I see like how you use your products and your motifs, you use them in areas that are almost non-conventional, like active wear. What's the drive for that? Is that all part of trying to take what the African representation to places or spaces or categories that are not known for that?
Yeah, I mean, African textile has been always, it has been, it didn't allow us to become bigger, to become more. The texture.
When you say bigger within the fashion
within
industry.
the fashion,
Okay.
yeah. So the textures in which, we found our textile in was very limited. It was more of a ceremonial, traditional events and activities, but we have a daily lives, we have daily routines, we are competing, amongst the world, so how do we then, for me it was more of like, how do I allow, this African textile to become bigger, to be part of the whole conversation, because the conversation is not just ceremonies, it's not just traditions, it's in our daily, lives, so that's why we went into heavily. This was early in 2015 when we started the African, sportwear, our first African-inspired sportwear, and it's been now the African, like so many people have taken on and embraced it. It's a beautiful thing to see us allowing this textile to breathe and to become more. So I think if we want to be part of the global conversation, we have to be part of the conversation. We need to allow our creativity to belong there.
It's interesting looking at how far back you started off way in Cape Town, South Africa. I've seen a lot of brands also come out of that ecosystem, still representing in the active wear, sports wear category, which is like a category where everyday wear that typically African brands and African products do not sit. Like I've seen Bathu, I've seen quite a number. Do you feel like there was some inspiration that they took from what you guys had started? I know. I just had to ask.
No, definitely, it's out there. But this was the mission for Masa Mara. We wanted to become a blueprint because there was no blueprint when we started. There was no people who looked like us in the industry. Of course, we had to take, all the rejection and we turn them into, a building blocks, and now there's so many beautiful artists, biggest brands, within Africa who don't even wish to compromise on that. So they're taking on with the capacity, with the means, and becoming bigger. And that was our wish and dream. So yeah,
the journey is on, but the vision is alive.
Exactly.
Okay. You run production in Cape Town with like artisans and local makers. What does local mean to you in this globalized creative industry, especially as you also seek to bring a lot of the local motifs and your prints into globalized categories, so to speak?
That part for me, it's where my fashion sustainability or my creative sustainability comes in, empowering our people, because they really understand these craftsmanships more than anyone. Didn't make sense for us to outsource this when we have people, the elders, who still have this knowledge and skills amongst ourselves, who are still very able, and also be able to teach this to the young generations, to carry it forward, of course, in the better, modern, futuristic, innovative ways. So it was very important for me to make sure that we empower our community, because we can't talk of empowerment and sustainable creative ecosystem without starting from amongst ourselves, and of course, what we don't have the capacity, we collaborate, but what we are able to do, we do it.
So in the fashion industry, most of the times when there are things relating to Africa, they will come up mostly as trends. How have you protected Masa Mara from becoming one of those trends and to keep it as a movement to really be able to drive the change?
I think the first thing was to understand the why, why we are creating, the understanding the message in which we are sharing through our creativity. And that's from early time, it told us that we were not going to be part of the trends. We were building something that's going to last long gone when we are gone, as we inherited it from the people who long gone. So with that, it automatically became a movement instead of becoming a trend that comes and go. I still today have people who sees the piece in, for 2016 and say, this is what's happening now, and I'm like, this is what we wanted to do. We wanted to build a longevity, within the creative, African creatives. It wasn't about, let's just jump on what's happening, because we knew that comes and go. But if we wanted, because also it's not about hype, it wasn't about the vibes, it was more about educational. So it made sense to build that strong beginning, that strong why, and make sure that we live up to it. It gets better, it becomes very innovative, but it doesn't change, the how changes, but the why remains the same. Yeah.
Do you feel like there's been a conscious effort within the global fashion industry to always keep things that create representation for African and African brands, mostly in the trend category, versus making it mainstay of global fashion?
Honestly speaking, it's not to save us. It's just to make sure that we follow what's happening on the other side. And that's why I've always said, what we do ourselves, once we start even creating our own trends, it will actually become more impactful if it comes from us. Yes, we can become the trend, the global trends from ourselves. We can collaborate with, the global, with the world, but when it's always coming from the other side, it means that we're already failing ourselves. We are failing ourselves because we're not visionaries, we are not trendsetters, and yet we have so much diverse. So we should be coming up with these things every day, in our creative ways.
So I'll move a little bit into the business side of things.
Yeah.
Fashion is a brutal business.
Yes.
What has been your toughest lesson in terms of running a business as a creative?
Oh, the toughest was to make sure that we remain true to ourselves, because we've received so much opportunities that, would have allowed us to cash out, exactly. Dilute ourselves, take our production elsewhere, in order to maximize the production capacities, satisfying the market and things like that. That has been very challenging, financial challenging, because then when you say this is the cause, it challenged the business, the core value of a business. Business is all about making money. It's all about, selling something. But then for us, it was more than selling. We had to do educational, and educating people takes time. And when you're telling an investor, when you're telling, a bank that we're going to educate people about self-love,
before you sell to them,
before you
make
sell
money.
to them, you see. So then looking at the time in which it's going to take, to turn this educational into a sales. But we knew that it's not for now. The business we're building is a legacy. We were able to take any challenges and difficulties. We're still facing the difficulties because until today, but we get stronger every day and be very creative in making means, and using our creativities to be able to support the cause, the why.
So I know a lot of creators will be listening to you and they will be able to identify, because it's a reality.
Yeah.
How, from your story or your journey, how have you been able to manage it? From the point where there's a temptation to focus on the money and let the creativity die, and how did you balance it?
It's, honestly speaking, it was a very tough thing, but it became easier for me. Simply, I had to understand the ecosystem. I knew I had to find something that I'm going to trade in order to be able to fund my work. My company is self-funded for the past 10 years of Masa Mara, of course, plus other, 5 years of education, that are self-educating myself. So the whole 15 years, it's me funding my work and reinvesting into my work. But we have to make a very tough decision and self-discipline and making sure that the focus and the investment becomes our creativity. Anything that could take from this, we had to shut it down.
So what did you do? So I'm going to push the envelope a little bit on this. So what did you do specifically to make the money to be able to now say this is going to generate the cash flow, and now that's what's going to fund the education and the obsession with the art and focusing on the culture and the story that really the brand wants to represent?
I mean, I think one of the things, remember, you can, when you have something to sell, even if it's hard to sell, you do sell. However, it becomes hard because you have now to divide these funds into a lifestyle, you know, to support you, to support your surroundings, to support everything and support your dream. So for us, it was like with the little we're making, it can only be invested back into this. So we had to cut everything else that could need this support. Of course, shrinking ourselves. Me as the brand owner, I had to disappear in order for my work to become visible. You know, it's one of the hardest things that we ever done, because then how do you build a brand, you know, without being able to be there to carry it forward? You know, so our lifestyle was non-existent, but the brand, you know, stood out, yeah.
Okay, so now specifically on the two things. So
Yeah.
I have a second thought about what you just said, which I'll come back to.
Yeah.
So I want you to say specifically on the making the money side.
Yes.
So where was it that you had a specific collection that you were selling to make money to be able to fund the business, or you were doing things in other spaces like art or something to use to fund the clothing business up until the point where the story became relevant?
Honestly, I had to pull up my shoes, my socks. So I used to do trade, like market, street market, vendoring, you know, going in street and just sell things. I used to do, I would do like styling, ghost creating.
Okay.
You know, I created a lot of for people. Some actually big brands to date, I still do it. I've done big brands, you know, ghost creating. You know, some of the things people wear it to date. You know, so it was me just saying, okay, I have something to trade.
So you use that to make money
Exactly,
to finance
to
the
fund
brand.
that.
So when
know.
you say ghost creation, maybe you can give a little bit more detail to people who are not in the fashion industry so that we can understand how your financial structure became much more solid and robust.
So I have the people, because of course I understood from early going the power of my creativity, you know, and the storytelling. So within the people I've created, like example, I've created some of the art, photograph, conceptualize the images, you know.
For big brands.
For big brands, you know. I've created a few sneakers, you know. But all of these things came, you know, from me, you know, like collaborations, basically me knocking on places, on doors. I've always say, it's a matter, I always have so much things that I keep creating all the time, and I'll send these things to people. You know, I'm like, I have these things, if you wish to use it, we can talk. And some of them, I mean, I've sent thousands and few came back, you know.
And that gave you the cash flow to really...
to reinvest into the work. But on top of that, I didn't also stop there, because I will trade in the markets, you know, street markets and things that most of creatives today will never dare to do, you know. But when no one knows your brand, you know, you need to support, because like building a brand, you have to do product development. You know, how do you do that when you don't have that? Of course, that's more money you get from, you know, everywhere. And then minimizing your cost, your personal costs, to make sure that everything is reinvested into it over time, and then it became, you know,
much more sustainable.
Exactly, and profitable.
What you just said, which was the second part of the question I was saying earlier on, was the fixation with the business versus your individual brand. Is that probably one of the reasons why Masa Mara as a brand now became very big internationally, whereas people knew very little of the individual who was behind the brand?
That's exactly the case. You know, I don't know if it's really a good thing or bad thing, but I think now, because even to date, like here home, you know, in Rwanda, sometimes when I tell them I'm Masa Mara, you know, they still get surprises. You know, people who are outside of the creative industry, you know, they know of the work, but they don't know the people behind it. You know, but it was all intention. Unfortunately, we had to do it that way in order to be able to stay, you know, alive, you know.
Yeah, that's an interesting and smart approach, because we do work with a lot of creatives and you always see the story. And nowadays in the world of social media, there's always the push to say you need to be at the forefront, and people tend to follow the stories of the people behind the brands more than the brand themselves. How do you think somebody building in this environment, or what the narrative has become right now for building brands, how would they be able to survive if they are to try and replicate your playbook?
Yeah, I mean, this is what happens, you know. We often told of the winning side of the story, of what's happening, But when when you're being told to be, on forefront of your image, of course, people buy into, the story, the people behind the creativities, but also we're not told what it's going to require for you to become that image of your brand. It requires more than actually what you're supposed to be putting into your brand, because you have to safeguard your image and identity that people are going to buy into. So it means you invest into yourself so people can recognize themselves within you. But then to balance it, unless you have a support structure to be able to spread this profitable resources into the business and into your self-development at the same time, it becomes the hardest things.
Well, this is a very interesting segue, but I'm liking it because there's always a lot of controversy with all these personality or individual driven brands that are out there. But then from what I'm hearing, there could be a challenge with sustainability, because now when the person is driving the brand and is at the forefront, you are investing a lot of the resources to keep that personality running. And that can easily take you away from the core business. And over time, if the core business is not very good at what it does, the individual could still be well invested in, but when people interact with the brand and they don't get the quality that is promised, then the brand dies.
100%. The longevity of the brand becomes a long lifespan. But at the end of the day, I often say we just need to understand what we are doing and combine many approaches. Because we all have many background, and background influences what we're doing. So when we are trying to hear what one person says that we should use as a formula, but their formula, it doesn't reflect our life, experience, our surroundings, our background. So I think honestly, it's just a matter of us looking into we need to be a student of life in every angle and make sure we take all this knowledge and formulate our own formula that works.
Growing up, I've always had this theory, like, you always see people doing things and you see what's at the forefront, and you'd assume that, okay, I also want to do it and become successful like Masa Mara. But you don't know that, like from your story, where you actually started building the foundation to be able to keep Masa Mara going wasn't the Masa Mara that everybody was seeing. It was like the work that you're doing in the background. And for me, I find that to be very insightful in terms of when young people were coming up and trying to do stuff, even not young people, as business people, to always try and go a little beneath or behind to understand the fundamentals that actually drives and sustains a particular business or a particular entity that is in existence. It's an interesting, maybe to segue a little bit into that area, you've collaborated with hotels, retailers, e-commerce platforms, building products. You talked about having designed sneakers as a ghost creative for a lot of major brands and all that, for which I'm sure the financial returns were good. How do you choose partnerships in a way that you don't also lose the soul of the brand that you're trying to build? And by that, I mean the brand Masa Mara.
Yes. You see, this is actually goes back to the previous question. Honestly, we had to become very strategic, in order for us to maintain that Masa Mara aesthetic. And when you're nobody, people really can't buy into that brand until it becomes the brand that they see themselves in. And that's where the ghost creating, outsourcing our creativity came in, where we were like, if we sell them Masa Mara, it's going to be diluted. That was the beginning before I go to your question. So then we had to okay, I can give you my creativity and you don't have to give me any credit. Give me the money that I can invest into my brand. Now that the brand has the message and people understand, the message is very clear, very, very clear. Any brand that comes, they come for that message. Okay. They're not coming for anything else. And that's why I say our biggest asset is our creativity now. So when someone comes, they come in because of the Masa Mara storytelling. Any brands that have collaborated under Masa Mara, they literally come because of understanding that Africanism, that African love, that African story. We want to be part of it. Can you come and add your touch of this storytelling onto our side of the world? And that's how it's been. So with that, it becomes very controllable because we had to build the story and make sure that whoever comes to us they fall into that storytelling of the Masa Mara, of the Africa. So, of course, it's not something of snap of finger. It's years of building, of work, of constantly, and also saying no to some of those things, that came earlier under Masa Mara and that could potentially take away from this direction we were taking. That's when we had a way to say, okay, we might not be able to do it under Masa Mara. How about I do it and you get all the credit?
Now thinking about it, for you as a person and as a brand, how does it make you feel, especially when maybe you see how Africans will relate to maybe a Gucci or an Adidas or some collaboration that you might have done, and you know this is your product, but Africans are excited by it just because it has a foreign name. And you think about it and you're like, if you had built this and not sold it as a ghost creative to somebody and built it as Masa Mara, these same Africans wouldn't have bought it or wouldn't have been interested in it. How does it make you feel as a creative?
It's really one of the saddest things. I remember actually I was at this store in Cape Town, I'm there, just observing some of the product. And a person was really mesmerized by one of my products that I've created, and one of my friends were like, oh, he's the designer, And the guy looked at me and said, are you mad? Are you crazy?
He couldn't believe.
Couldn't believe at all. He couldn't believe, But for me, honestly, it doesn't surprise me, And that's why I make it a very, very, very strong mission now that at least I'm like, I might not have control of what you're going to look like. I'll have a control what I want to look like. And hopefully I can become a mirror of, because that's why even if you look, this athleisure that we incorporate, it's really to be able to inspire the young generation, because they can find themselves within, approach, But with these brands, it's not by coincidence, it's by design where, their target, is to feed the colonial narrative. So if you're someone who's a forward African thinking, it doesn't come as a surprise. Of course, it's heartbreaking that in order for you to love my creativity, to love my worth, my mind, it has to be in someone's lens. And that's what I was saying that I had to do. I had to go outside of Africa in order to become accepted in Africa, to be worth, to be looked at. It's one of the saddest things, but you have to be very strategic in order to reach your people at whatever cost.
You've touched on something that's got me thinking a lot, because the conversation around fast fashion always ends up having Africa have conversations around, okay, it used to allow secondhand clothes to come into the market, and people try to build the narrative around, the economic viability of having secondhand clothes because now people will get to wear. But then what you've said that's making me think about it much deeply is that the people who created the consumption habits where somebody would build, he'll buy 5 clothes in a sitting, and the next day they'll go and buy another 5 clothes. Why don't you go back and say, repurpose the same products that have been bought and thrown out versus bringing it down into Africa as the alternative to having Africa produce? That's a thought that I have really...
For me, I don't blame those who do it. The people who are from the other side, I don't blame them because they're looking after themselves.
So we have to also look after ourselves to say, are we comfortable with first slowing down our production and accepting secondhand products that are the remnants of somebody's fast fashion habits?
Even understanding, because we say, when it comes in, it does this, it does that, but we don't talk about also what it takes away. The dignity, number one. The dignity. It takes you away. I always say as people, many people don't know the feeling of being the first one to wear the garment, a brand new garment. We talk about a third world and all of those things. These words and things, it's to make you small, to make you second thinker. And then you have more of all the factories being closed down. All the chain that benefits from these factories, in Africa that are closing down. So it's very, very political conversation, But I think, for me, it shouldn't be even something we should be entertaining. Because we talk about environmental, but then we're not contributing
To that
to
environmental
the environment.
degradation.
Yeah. So again, it becomes, but again, that's why I said I don't blame them, because then it's a design in which they're fulfilling for themselves. So we're becoming a trap. We're falling into that trap. And that's why you find the support, the investment comes into educating about this kind of
About
things.
slow fashion.
Exactly, on the continent. You know, there's so many eco-friendly, conscious, and you name it, that comes here. And the moment the studies, those who are a little bit educated, or those who are educated, not even little bit, those who are educated, those in places, they are the ones championing these stories.
But then that narrative continues to keep an ecosystem where majority of our people don't have the dignity
exactly.
of being the first people to wear a particular cloth that has been made.
Even exactly the dignity, and also the production chain
Yep.
that's feed and support so many people. And when you bring a garment that's ready finished, then you're cutting out all the other chains of the production. When you're saying slow down and and repurpose, it's going to be so expensive, so slow, that you're going to need to import. I mean, from somewhere.
Wow. So we'll shift the conversation gear a little bit. You've shown in places like Shanghai.
Yeah.
What did it teach you about how non-Africans see African creativity? And I'm picking that as a segue from the conversation that we were having before, because when the fashion industry talks about Africa, it's always easy to put out some fans and say, let's educate them about slow fashion and all that. Coming from that kind of structure, how do they see African creativity?
They know of what's made of Africa. Honestly, sometimes it is surprising to many other people, but for me it's not a surprise, because when I'm there and I get to see how they're ready for it, because they know what it is, they know what we have, so I've showcased around the world, and I still get the same reception that I get in Africa as well, because they understand what we have to offer. It's just a matter of us being able to start exporting, but it has to be intentional. It's not there by help. It's not there to just, it's an African brand. No, it's a global brand based in Africa.
So talking about exporting, the conversation I want to shift a little bit also around scaling and new technologies. How do you use AI personally?
I love it, actually. One of my latest collection, I dived into AI quite, in designing. So I had a conversation with AI. So I would sketch, I would feed it into AI, and then we would just try to figure out how best to develop this product. This is my limitations. This is my resources. This is how far, and trying to dive into the future through it. I think we need to think, innovative. We need to think futuristic. We need to think, because that's how we can become part of the global conversation at early, not waiting until we jump on us. We should even be thinking on how to create these systems for us that helps us. So I think it was quite a fascinating thing to see, to use technology to enhance my creative thinking.
Do you not see it as, or do you not see a possibility of these technologies stripping away the cultural nuance that our creative products come to the market with?
They can only strip away what's not there. If you really don't know it, if you don't know what you have, then it can disappear.
Okay, that's a...
Because remember, think about, our ancestors have been always futuristic, forward thinking. If you have that understanding, There's no way you can dilute or you can take away from your power. It only enhances your power. It's a tool. Same like everything. Think about hand sewing and machine sewing. It's different tools. You know?
Now, maybe since we are embracing the technology, do you think that like artificial intelligence can help designers overcome some of the challenges that we have, like production and planning challenges and being able to scale?
100%, 100%. But we need to understand that we have challenge first. We need to understand that we have the challenge. So once we know the challenge, then we find the means in which way we can overcome these challenges. And that's where you use critical thinking in such artificial thinking in order to advance this, you know. But you have to be aware in order to understand how you're going to communicate with this such technology.
So understanding your business in a way that you can see the various value chains that exist, the bottlenecks that you have, and how these technologies can help to remove these bottlenecks to allow you to move faster, to produce more, and still maintain your quality.
Exactly. I mean, there's one thing that I do. Sometimes, like I said, I had a lot of chats with AI, you know, in order to challenge my thinking.
Okay.
But the thinking is already there. So when you're embracing the technology with the base, when it gives me something that's below my understanding,
You can pick it.
you know, you can pick it. But the problem is, where it can be a problem is when you're literally just using it. Because even now, you can read everywhere in our daily lives. Now, I can pick up, oh, AI, you can pick up. Because it's controlling and it's guiding instead of us using it as a tool.
To
You know,
generate
to
and
generate.
create.
It's your information that's being challenged to think. It's like me chatting to you. That's how I take it. But I'm not going to just take what you're saying
You process
and
it.
then, you see what I mean? I have to process it. And that's where we're failing with this technology, you know, or you know, things that we are approaching. So it's if you don't have the fundamental to build with, you might even be getting false information and you just
You would not
execute
know.
it. We not know. But if you have base and understanding, you can say, oh, wait, you know?
Yes.
Exactly.
Wow. It's been an amazing conversation, Masa Mara. As we seek to wrap up on this discussion, I have two more questions. When we talk about the fashion business, there's always like, okay, we have the fashion capitals of the world. You have a Paris, you have a Milan, or New York. If we think about the continent and we would want to build like a fashion capital for Africa, based on your journeys and your travels, where would you put such a fashion capital for the continent?
Oof. It's toughest.
Don't be biased, just be objective.
It's toughest, but we've had people on the continent who've kept the authenticity of Africanness, and they still carry it. I would say it's somewhere in West.
You can give me a city.
You know, I can say somewhere in West. I can say Lagos.
Okay.
I can say Senegal.
Dakar.
Dakar. I could say even also Accra.
Okay.
You know, simply being because of they've really led the fashion, the authenticity, you know, of African fashion.
Okay.
You know, but of course there's many factors in order to build those things. There's the support structures, you know, there's the ecosystems, you know, there's like, you know, the support from the safety and all of these things that we need to look into it. But I'll say those are my three places that I'll say, you know, simply because they're one of the people who've held on to their culture, you know, because today you see someone in the, you know, official meeting wearing a bubu. Where, example, in East, it's rare to see someone wearing a traditional attire in conference, in official meetings. See?
I get you.
So if we want to talk about African fashion,
I get you.
we need to look at the places that has been championing, you know, within at least their capacity to hold on to the cultures and pushing it forward.
So Lagos, Dakar, or Accra?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. I think I'm going to keep this question and ask a number of people who come on the podcast. I've not really thought about the angle you've put to it in terms of how culturally they've held on to it. At the back of my mind, whilst you're talking, I'm like, why? Because what you're saying is true. Why? And I don't think I fully have the answers. So it's also one thing that I would process. I don't know if I can ask you why. Why do you think it's the case that they've been able to hold on to?
Maybe it's something I also need to find out, because it's just observation that we've seen throughout, and it's very visible. It's data that are there. You can get to see. When you're in Senegal, you see how people embrace, their cultural, aesthetic. When you're in Ghana, when you in Nigeria, it's very, you can't not miss it. You find those who are in suits here and there. But that's not first, You can still look expensive. You can still look, classy. You can still look modern.
But in your traditional way.
Aesthetic,
That's the homework we have from this
exactly.
talk. So my final question. So imagine someone is wearing your work long after you're gone, in 100 years' time. Something inspired by Masa Mara.
Yeah.
What do you hope they feel in that moment when they're wearing a legacy brand from the legendary Masa Mara?
My heart beats as you even ask the question. They need to be proud of of who they are. I think because we denied ourselves for a long time. If we get to a point where you can say, I smile when I look at myself in the mirror. When I walk some places and someone says, you remind us what it means to be African. I want them to feel that way. And I have no doubt it will be that way.
I have no doubt too. Yeah. Thank you very much, Nyambo Masa Mara. This has been the Rooted in Quality podcast. Our guest, Nyambo Masa Mara, Rwandan-born fashion enthusiast and fashion entrepreneur, building amazing businesses with a clear understanding of where the value drivers are and how to structure his business to be able to extract value to build a foundation for a fashion-forward brand as he's building. And I'm coming out of this interview with so much insight. I almost feel like I have the tools necessary to go and build my own fashion business. So it's been amazing. Thank you very much, Nyambo, for such an insightful conversation. And thank you for joining us up to this stage. This is the Rooted in Quality podcast from Afro Quality. We'll be back again with an amazing conversation with somebody building something amazing from somewhere on this continent. Thank you very much.